I thought it was nothing. That's the sentence that I keep returning to. Not I didn't notice, I noticed. Not I wasn't paying attention, I was. I looked at what was happening and made an active assessment that it was nothing, and that assessment was the problem. The relationship was 3 years old when the pattern became visible. My partner Mia and I had been living together for 18 months. The life we'd built was good, textured, warm, full of the specific pleasures of two people who genuinely like each other navigating shared space. We cooked together. We had running jokes. We had the kind of ease that people work for years to build. What we also had, from about month 8 of the cohabitation, was a recurring dynamic that I noticed and classified as insignificant. When I was stressed, at work, about family, about anything, I went quiet. Not cold, not cruel. Just internally absent in a way that had a particular quality. And when I went quiet in that way, Mia escalated. She'd ask if something was wrong, I'd say no, she'd ask again differently, I'd say I was fine, and eventually the conversation would become about the gap between what I was saying and what she was experiencing, me insisting I was fine, her insisting something was off. The cycle had a name, in therapy terminology. I found the name out much later, the pursuer-withdrawer cycle. Common. Identifiable. Addressable, if both people understand what's happening. At the time, I called it, Mia being intense when I needed space. The reframe I was using was completely self-serving, and I couldn't see that. I was taking a dynamic that involved two people's behavior and locating the problem entirely in hers. I was the person withdrawing. She was the person responding to withdrawal in the way that anxiously attached people respond to withdrawal, by pursuing connection. Neither of us was villainous. Both of us were in a pattern that neither of us had named, let alone addressed. The reason I classified it as nothing was multi-layered. First, each individual instance was small. We'd have the cycle and then it would resolve and we'd be fine, and I'd tell myself it wasn't a pattern, just weather. Second, naming it would require me to look at my own contribution, which was the withdrawal, which I had very strong feelings about not examining. My quietness under stress was something I'd always framed as a personality trait, introversion, a need for internal processing time. The idea that it was causing harm to the person I loved was not a frame I was ready to sit with. Third, I thought time would handle it. That Mia would learn my rhythms and stop pursuing when I went quiet, and the cycle would naturally dissolve. Time did not handle it. Time expanded it. By year 3, the cycle was the main texture of conflict in our relationship. It was no longer occasional weather. It was structural. And it was no longer just about stress, it was about anything that created distance between us. I had one response to distance, more distance. She had one response to my distance, pursue. We had never talked about it directly. We had never given it a name. We had had the same fight, in different costumes, about 40 times. Mia brought it to therapy. She suggested couples therapy and I agreed because I could see she needed it even though I thought the problem was hers. That last part is worth repeating. I agreed to couples therapy believing the problem was hers. I was going to support her in understanding her intensity. The therapist was skilled and unmerciful in the best sense. She named the cycle clearly. She named both roles. And she asked me, specifically, what do you think your withdrawal does to Mia? I said I thought it gave both of us space. She said, from her perspective, your withdrawal is experienced as rejection. Can you stay with that for a moment? I didn't want to stay with it. But I stayed with it. And in staying with it, I understood for the first time that what I'd been classifying as nothing, as simply my introversion, as a neutral personality trait that Mia needed to accommodate, was, to her, a recurring communication that said, I don't want to be close to you right now. That experience, repeated across years, had been accumulating into something that felt like chronic rejection. It wasn't nothing. It was the main thing. The work that followed, learning to communicate when I was withdrawing rather than simply withdrawing, learning to stay slightly more present under stress, learning to say I need to process internally for a bit and I'll be back rather than just going silent, was difficult in the specifically difficult way of changing something habitual. Not willpower difficult. Habit difficult. Pattern difficult. The kind of change that requires constant attention and regular failure before it starts to feel natural. But Mia and I are still together. We've been together 6 years. The cycle still appears occasionally. But now we can name it when it appears, and naming it breaks it faster than any amount of managing it used to. The thing I thought was nothing was the thing. It almost always is. The small, recurring, easy-to-dismiss patterns, the ones you've explained away so many times they've started to feel like background noise, those are the ones worth examining most carefully. Because background noise is still noise. And the people you love can hear it, even when you've learned not to. What I've learned about the pattern I've described, the specific mechanism, the way it operates below the level of conscious decision, is that it doesn't respond to willpower alone. Willpower is useful for short-term resistance. For the long-term restructuring of a deep habit or tendency, you need something different. You need to understand what the pattern is doing for you. What it's providing. What it would cost you to give it up. Every destructive pattern has a function. That's the uncomfortable truth. We don't maintain things that don't serve us in some way, even if the service is maladaptive, even if the cost is greater than the benefit. The pattern of staying when I should have left, or not seeing what was in front of me, or following the feeling without examining it, each of those had a function. Protection from loss. Management of fear. Maintenance of an identity that required me to believe certain things about myself or others. Understanding the function doesn't excuse the pattern. But it makes the change possible in a way that pure willpower doesn't. Because once you understand what the pattern is doing, you can ask, is there another way to meet that need? Can I get the protection, or manage the fear, or maintain whatever I need to maintain, through a behavior that doesn't cost me what this one does? Usually the answer is yes. Usually there is a better path to the same destination. You just have to be willing to find it, which requires first being willing to admit what you were trying to reach. That's the hardest part. Not the change itself. The honesty that makes change possible. I'm still working on it. I think everyone is. The work doesn't end. It just gets more familiar. And familiar, at least, is something you can navigate. Even in the dark. There's a particular quality of mourning I've noticed in the period after working through something significant. A specific lightness. Not happiness, exactly, not the performed kind, not the kind that requires circumstances to be good. Something more elemental, the sensation of being present in your own life instead of slightly beside it. I chased that sensation for years before I understood that it wasn't something that arrived. It was something you had to create the conditions for. And the conditions are, at their core, very simple: honesty with yourself about what's happening, willingness to feel what the situation asks you to feel, and the courage to take the action you know is needed even when the action is uncomfortable. Simple to describe. Difficult to execute. Difficult in ways that are specifically, personally yours, in the ways your history makes difficult, your particular fears, your particular blind spots. But that difficulty is not a wall. It's a map. The places where you find the most resistance are usually the places most worth going. I spent time going around the resistance. Managing it, distracting from it, building elaborate structures to not have to walk through it. The structures consumed more energy than walking through the resistance ever did. I just didn't know that until I started walking through. The story I've told here is the story of one chapter. One specific set of choices in one specific situation. But the mechanism, the way the pattern operated, the way I enabled or avoided or mistook or missed, that mechanism has appeared in other forms in other chapters. It probably will again. Not identically, but recognizably. What I carry forward is the recognition itself. The specific texture of the thing when it's happening. The way my body registers it before my mind catches up. The particular quality of the avoidance or the escalation or the wrong certainty. Learning to recognize the mechanism faster. Acting on the recognition sooner. That's the work. And it's worth doing. Every single time. I want to leave you with the thing I wish someone had told me earlier. Not a formula. Not a framework with steps. Something simpler and harder. Most of what we avoid in ourselves is survivable. The feeling we don't want to feel, the conversation we don't want to have, the truth we don't want to acknowledge, we avoid them because we believe, on some level, that having them will break something. That the reality is too large to hold. That if we stop managing around it, it will overwhelm us. It usually doesn't. What breaks us is more often the managing, the ongoing, exhausting, expensive work of keeping something at bay. The thing itself, when we finally let it in, is almost always more survivable than the anticipation of it. I know this from experience. From specific, personal, hard-won experience. The thing I dreaded most in the story I've told you was not as large as the managing of it. The moment I stopped managing and started facing was difficult, yes. But it was bounded. It had a shape. It moved. Things you manage around don't move. They sit in exactly the same place, requiring the same amount of energy to maintain, for as long as you're willing to keep paying. I stopped being willing. And what was underneath was not a catastrophe. It was just the truth. And the truth, it turns out, was something I could hold. So can you.